Hey folks, Mr. Finley here. This is just a short video on the actual process of set construction. There's a separate video on the design process, but once it's been designed, then the set has to be built, and that's a lot of what we'll be doing in this class. So this is a video on the process of set building, specifically as it relates to RTHS. So the designer has made the ground plans, he's made the elevations, he hands those to the technical director. What's the next thing that happens? Well, the technical director then creates the construction calendar. It's very important that everything gets done on time for the actors to use it as they need it and for it to be ready in time for technical rehearsals and opening for the show. As we start the year, you will be given a construction calendar. Later on in the year, you may be required to actually make a construction calendar. So there's an example there of what that looks like. You notice it's specific. Every single week, there's specific tasks that are getting done from the very, very beginning all the way to opening. So if you're making a construction calendar, what are the priorities? Well, they're listed there. I'm not sure you can read it. There's some video issues going on. But the first thing, we want to build the practical elements of the set that will be needed by the actors in the early rehearsals. So things like staircases and platforms, things that the actors actually interact with should always be the first thing that happens. Actually, the very first thing that happens that's not being mentioned there is we tape out the floor. We can do that because we're in the same space where we're building it. So we use spike tape to mark where walls and platforms will go so we can rehearse on those. But then in terms of the actual building, the first priority are the practical elements. The second are any flying units, including any masking. We don't have to do a lot of, we don't have a fly system, so we have no flying elements, but we do have a grid that will be moving masking around, so those things go in next, because again, they help define the space. The third is to build anything that will have a complicated or time-consuming paint job on it. So if there is a few different elements, but one of them has to have a lot of work done on it to paint it, that needs to get built first so that the painting can get done. Then the remainder of the construction schedule is any scenic elements related to the complexity of the item. Basically, the more complex the item, the earlier it is on the build schedule, and the simpler it is, the later it comes. And then you should always build some time in at the end of the schedule for adjustments and repairs and the inevitable changes that happen with any build. So that is the basic process of creating the calendar. As I said, at the beginning of the year, you'll be provided with one. Later on in the year, you may be asked to make a specific calendar for the whole set build if you're working as a technical director, or it may be just for your part of it if you're working on a specific team. Now, what you do when building a set is going to vary based on what elements of the set you're working on. If you're building a flat, it's going to be different than if you're painting the floor. So there's not a lot of general instruction I can give in this video, but there are a few overall things you should be aware of. First of all, basic safety stuff. There is a whole other video on safety, but just to go over some things, you want to make sure that your clothing is not going to be caught on anything. You don't want to get caught on a random screw and tear, or get caught in a saw and you lose your arm. That would be bad. Similarly, you want to make sure that your hair is away, whether that's tied back or put under a cap or something, so that that doesn't get caught also. Make sure you are paying attention to what you're doing. I mean, that seems obvious, right? But make sure if you're using a tool, you know how to use that tool. You've watched the appropriate videos. If it's a power tool, that you've been authorized to use it. And keep your mind on your task. Don't be chatting about who's dating who when you're operating a power saw. Keep your workspace clean. This is a big one. Building stuff, you make a mess. Part of the process of building is to keep that mess clean. Something I was taught is that your workspace represents physically the way your brain looks internally. So if your space is a mess, your brain is a mess. If your brain is a mess, you're not going to be working as efficiently and as artistically as you could be otherwise. You should know where all the first aid materials are kept and make use of them. You want to make sure you wash out any cuts, any splinters, put bandages on those, all that sort of thing. And then finally, if you're doing anything that requires ventilation, do it outside. That's what we use that sidewalk area outside the doors of the theater for painting stuff, spray painting, anything that might require ventilation. So those are just basic. I mean, they're pretty obvious. It feels stupid to even say them, but you'd be surprised how often we forget the obvious things. We're in a rush to get things done. So just make it as a priority. A few other things. This is an illustration there on the right of the most common sorts of joints that we are going to be constructing. A corner block joint and a keystone joint. In both cases, you can see how the short edge lines up with the long edge of one of the two blocks, and then there's what we call a strap or a keystone or a corner block, a thin piece of wood that goes over it to connect those joints. So that's what we do in woodworking. You most often will use those in the construction of flats. A flat is illustrated here. Any upright walls, for example, we don't truly build walls, we construct flats like this. And typically this is sort of a back view of them that shows the stiles and toggles for them. And they'd be either covered with fabric, which is cheap and light, or with plywood or masonite, which is heavier but more solid depending on the need. We will be building and taking apart lots of flats, so just getting used to that. The long beams, those are typically 8 feet or 10 feet, never more than 10 feet in our space because the grid is at 11 feet. And you'll see that they are set at right angles to the rails, which are the shorter edges. If you can see there, notice that the short edge of the long stiles on the sides lines up with the long edge of the rail, rather than vice versa. I'll show you why we do that in class, but it just helps with the stress on it. Then additionally, there are toggles that cross in between. Typically there are 2 toggles dividing into thirds if you're working on an 8-foot or a 10-foot flat, and then you have diagonal braces as well, and each of those are connected with those keystones or corner blocks. So once those are built, then they're usually covered. If you're working with plywood, that's pretty easy because it will get cut in advance to the right shape, and then it's just a matter of screwing it in or nailing it in. Fabric is a little bit harder. Here's a demonstration of that. We'll go over this in class, but basically the muslin will be stapled to one side, stretched over to the other, stapled on that side, glued around as well, and then stapled taut, and that will be painted. Actually, when you staple it, it's not taut. It usually has a give of about 3/4 of an inch, and then when you paint it, it tightens up and becomes taut. We'll demo that in class, but this is just a quick sort of review of that because it's something that you'll be doing a lot. The other bit of just speaking of flats, one additional thing you should look at. This is an elevation. The back, you can see how all the flats fit together. There are 5 different flats of different widths and heights there that are combined, and then the top shows what it looks like from the front. It looks like one big solid wall with a window in it and a door in it, but from the back you see that is constructed of multiple different flats. So those flats, we construct them in standard sizes. Sorry, you can probably hear my dogs barking. And then we put them together to make whatever walls we need. And those walls are then painted on the front so it all looks like one continuous wall. One way we do that is a trick called a Dutchman. A Dutchman is a strip of fabric that goes down almost like a piece of wallpaper. So where 2 flats meet and there's a seam in between, the Dutchman covers that so you don't see the seam, and then it's all painted the same, so it looks like it's one solid wall. You will absolutely be doing Dutchmaning when we get to painting our various sets. The last thing I'll mention in this video is construction of platforms. Platforms are very much like constructing a flat. It's just that the wood, instead of being flat like this, is turned upright like that, and there are more toggles in between because it has to hold weight. You can see a demonstration, an illustration there. And then there is plywood that goes on top of that. We have two 4x8 platforms that are in our stock at the moment. We will typically build them as necessary for other shows, and then those can be legged up by putting other beams in the corners to get whatever height you want and combining them to make sort of whatever architecture you need platform-wise. So those are the two primary things that you will be constructing, are flats and platforms. And most sets can be created by some combination of different flats and platforms and then other aesthetic elements. So those are the basics of the set building process at RTHS.